A strange dog refused to leave a woman's doorstep for days. He didn't beg, didn't bark, just stared at her door like he knew a secret. When she finally opened it, what he revealed wasn't just shocking. It was something no one in the neighborhood could ever forget. Before we start, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe. And really, I'm curious. Where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. The morning sun spilled across the quiet suburban street, where nothing unusual ever happened. Children rode their bikes, sprinklers sprayed across neat lawns, and neighbors waved politely. But in front of one white-painted house, something felt different. Sitting perfectly still on the grass was a stocky bulldog, his heavy frame and drooping jowls impossible to ignore. He didn't bark or whine, he just sat there staring at the front steps as if he were waiting for someone. At first, the neighbors whispered in passing. "Whose dog is that?" they murmured, glancing at the animal with cautious curiosity. Days passed and the whispers grew louder. The bulldog never moved far, never wandered to another street. Even when the mailman approached, or when kids pedaled dangerously close, the dog remained rooted to the same spot, his solemn eyes locked on the house. Inside, the woman who lived there pressed her face to the curtain, her chest tightened. Why was this dog waiting outside her home? So still, so determined, and so unshakably silent. By the second night, the woman could no longer ignore the weight pressing on her chest. Every time she glanced outside, the bulldog was still there, motionless, unblinking like a silent guard. His square frame was illuminated under the streetlight, casting a shadow that stretched across her yard. She pulled the curtains shut quickly, her pulse racing. The unease grew into dread. She had never seen this animal before, yet he acted as though her house was his rightful place. Thoughts swirled in her mind. Was he sick? Dangerous? Abandoned? At night, when the wind was quiet, she could hear him moving slowly near the fence, a heavy breath followed by the scrape of his nails against the sidewalk. It made her skin crawl. Her sleep became restless. Each creak of the house startled her. Each faint sound outside pulled her awake. She imagined glowing eyes at her window, imagined the weight of footsteps on her porch. And through it all, one truth echoed: the dog wasn't leaving. He was waiting. For her. On the third morning, the woman tried something different. She cracked the front door, leaving it open just a few inches, and tossed a piece of bread onto the porch. The bulldog didn't move. His eyes flicked briefly to the offering, then returned to her door, as if food was meaningless compared to whatever held his attention inside. Later that day, a neighbor approached with a broom, waving it lightly to scare the dog away. The bulldog stood, shuffled a few steps back, and then, almost stubbornly, returned to the exact same spot once the neighbor left. The persistence unsettled everyone. This wasn't a stray wandering for scraps. This was something else entirely. What chilled her most was his gaze. Whenever she looked through the window, his dark eyes locked instantly onto hers. There was no barking, no growling, no begging, just silent, patient watching. It was as if the dog knew something about her house, something she couldn't yet understand, and he was determined not to leave until she discovered it. That evening, as the woman stepped outside to water the flowers, her eyes drifted, unwillingly, toward the dog. For the first time, he shifted closer, not with menace but with a heavy, deliberate limp. His thick neck carried an old leather collar, frayed and weathered by time. And there, dangling beneath the folds of skin, she caught sight of a tag. Her heart jumped. She crouched carefully, keeping distance, and squinted at the tiny piece of metal. The letters were scratched, almost unreadable, as if someone had tried to remove them. All she could make out was a single initial and half of an address. The discovery rattled her. This wasn't a stray after all. Someone had tried to erase who he belonged to. As she backed away, the bulldog lowered himself onto the grass again, his heavy chest rising and falling. But his eyes followed her every step. It was no accident he was here. It was no coincidence. The dog was waiting, for her, and only her. By the fifth day, fear gave way to frustration. The woman could no longer bear living in her own house like a prisoner. With trembling hands, she pushed the door wide and stepped onto the porch. The air was heavy, her heartbeat thundering in her ears. The bulldog rose instantly, muscles taut, eyes fixed on her every movement. She froze, bracing for an attack. But instead, the animal let out a low whine, a sound so soft it startled her more than a growl would have. Slowly, he lowered himself to the ground, belly pressed against the pavement, his gaze never leaving hers. It wasn't a predator's stance. It was surrender. Confused, she took a cautious step forward. The bulldog shuffled closer, then stopped abruptly, as though drawing a line he would not cross. His body blocked the path like a living barrier, his eyes pleading, not threatening. For the first time, she realized he wasn't trying to frighten her. He was begging her to understand something she couldn't yet see. The standoff lingered until a familiar voice cut through the tension. A gray-haired neighbor from across the street shuffled closer, her eyes narrowing at the sight of the dog. "I know that one," she whispered, her tone a mixture of surprise and unease. The woman's breath caught. Finally, a clue. The neighbor explained that the bulldog once belonged to a family who had lived here years ago. They were quiet people, hardly noticed until suddenly, one day they were gone. Rumors spread of a tragedy, whispered in hushed tones, but no one knew for sure. And now, years later, the dog had returned, sitting faithfully in front of the same house, as if nothing had changed. The woman's skin prickled. She hurried inside and pulled out an old community newsletter tucked away in a drawer. There, in faded ink, was a photograph. The very bulldog, standing proudly beside children on this very porch. Her heart pounded. He hadn't chosen her house by accident. He had come home. The realization hit her like a wave. This wasn't just a stray searching for food or shelter. This was a loyal soul retracing his steps back to the only place he had ever known as home. The bulldog wasn't lost. He was waiting for the family who had vanished years before. Her throat tightened as she stepped back outside, clutching the faded newsletter in her hand. The dog lifted his head, his weary eyes locking onto hers with a haunting familiarity. He wasn't watching her out of suspicion. He was watching her because she stood where his loved ones once did. In his mind, she was the last link to the life he'd lost. Tears stung her eyes as the truth sank deeper. This was why he hadn't eaten, why he refused to move, why he ignored everyone else. He wasn't searching for just anyone. He was searching for them. And in the quiet ache of his waiting, she finally understood. He had never stopped believing they would return. The woman stood frozen at her doorway, the bulldog's gaze cutting into her like an unanswered question. Neighbors gathered on the sidewalk, whispering in disbelief. Some urged her to call animal control, others insisted the dog was dangerous. But deep inside she knew none of them understood what was truly happening. With a trembling breath, she turned the handle and pulled her front door wide open. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to pause. Then, as if he had been waiting for that moment all along, the bulldog surged forward, not with aggression but with desperate relief. He rushed inside, heading straight to the living room fireplace, collapsing on the very spot he once claimed, years ago. Gasps echoed outside as the neighbors leaned closer to the windows. The woman's pulse thundered in her ears. She hadn't given shelter to a stray. She had opened her door to history, to loyalty that refused to die. Her voice cracked as she whispered into the silence. "He didn't just find my house, he found his way back home.